forgot about your seeds, oh prisoner of me, and you will not find me within your collections.
Folks, welcome inside the Parisi Palace, high above 3773 East Broadway. This is a live edition of the Jake Feinberg Show, coming on Power Talk. Please go to our website, powertalk.live. Download our free app to your smartphone. You stream all of our live local programming, including Solomon on Blast, the Jim Parisi Show, and yours truly, the Jake Feinberg Show. Can't thank you enough for making us part of your day today. And yeah, there might be a State of the Union by the President of the United States tonight, but as far as I'm concerned, my next guest is somebody who can deliver a State of the Union in an authoritative fashion as a multi-instrumentalist, driving social consciousness, touching people's hearts, and bringing smile to people's faces. Most importantly, looking to inspire them to be who they are, find their true nature, and just be themselves. And he continues to do it on the bandstand in acoustic and electric settings. A decorated career, and a guy that I had a chance to meet in person, and we did a great Facebook Live interview up at his house a few months back. Fred Tackett, welcome back to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Good to be talking to you, Jake. How you doing, man?
It's just, I'm doing great, man. I'm, just hopping around the world, doing my thing.
Right on.
I have to ask you right off the bat, I recently connected with Mason Williams, and he was marinating in these folk clubs in Oklahoma City, and I just wanted to know if you ever crossed paths with him there.
No, and I didn't run across Mason until Los Angeles,
What was, in what capacity? Was it the Smothers Bro? I mean, when did you first cross paths with Mason?
Just, I think he was hanging out with Lynn Anderson, the country singer.
Dig, yeah.
And I knew I had played on her record, and we played a gig. Actually, I think it was more likely in close to where you are, somewhere in either New Mexico or Arizona. We were playing a gig, and we saw Lynn Anderson and Mason and everybody.
Because he was playing at these clubs like the Budai Lounge. I mean, this was like mid-60s. I mean, I know you were doing your thing, but you would say, Tackett, that your foundation was jazz before rhythm and blues. I guess what I'm getting at is like the idea of like, I just saw the Fish Barry Melton, from Country Joe and the Fish, and he was clearly a folkie. Like his base foundation was folk music, and those cats ultimately would put their own spin on it, and like you would have the, in the Bay Area, the bands like the Grateful Dead, or in some cases Country Joe and the Fish or Jefferson Airplane. They would leave the head of the tune and improvise off of that, and essentially that is a form of jazz. That's improvisation, except he didn't have a jazz background, and so I know you did. But I kind of wanted you to talk about your concept of jazz and how improvisation can lend itself to all musics.
Well, I've said many times that Little Feat is a jazz band that plays rock and roll, because there's so much improvisation going on. Just the format of the rock and roll bands of the '60s, like you're talking about the Grateful Dead, was play the head and then people take solos, which is a jazz thing, not a folk thing at all. And at first the folk music, there was rock and roll bands that they had heard, So, the jazz thing is improvisation, just goes back to the second trumpet player in the big band always played the jazz solos. There's always a jazz solo, a saxophone solo, and a trumpet solo in the big band things. So all that concept of improvisation came from jazz guys, playing. In fact, a lot of Dixieland bands back in the turn of the century,
right, like 1920s or 1910s or something.
Yeah, I'm not even really sure of the musical history, but I just know that the Dixieland bands would they'd play the head, and there'd be clarinet solo or there'd be trumpet solo, but then at one point there'd be the whole, all the guys in the horn players, not necessarily the rhythm section guys, but the horn players would be simultaneously improvising in Dixieland bands. You hear that a lot, and you didn't hear that in the jazz bands and stuff. You very rarely heard two guys like Chet Baker and Shorty Rogers or somebody playing at the same time. Everybody plays separately. But in rock and roll over the last 10 years or so with the thing, it got to be where Paul and I a lot of times will be playing at the same time. And I know when we play with Anders Osborne and stuff, there's a lot of examples where guitar players will both take off together and improvise and play together at the same time. And that was, even when we started Little Feat, that was not a thing that we would ever do. I remember Billy Payne was the first guy that we started encouraging Paul and I, like, why don't you buy us both just play? And we'd be like, what? What are you talking about?
Well, you're talking about, like, I mean, so many things are going through my head, but I mean, you're talking about in the studio, because I mean, you weren't well, I guess you were talking about the second iteration of Little Feat. I'm talking about in the live setting. I mean, this is the other thing I wanted to ask. There's many things I have to ask Tackett about, but the thing is that we just had our 4th annual Jazz Fest, and if I have anything to say about it, next January, Little Feat will be down here for Jazz Fest. But
that'd be great.
It'd be so cool. And so Tom Bones Malone, was down here, and I was interviewing him, and he said that, one day he used to play Sweet Basils in New York with Gil Evans all the time, and they used to go out during the set breaks and sit out, stand outside by the garbage can and just talk, and they were out there one night, and this sort of second call trumpet player, substitute trumpet player came out back, and he said, Gil, I don't know when to play. And Gil said, play when you feel like playing. When even if somebody else is playing, play if you feel like playing. If you don't feel like playing, don't play. And the guy was absolutely confused. But that, but Tom knew what he meant, because Gil was basically saying, if you're inspired, and ultimately if you can make it, make the sum of its parts greater than the whole. I mean, if you can do something colorful, if that's when you feel like playing, then play. And did you ever have any kind of, and it's sort of, when you said that Dixieland thing, when you had guys soloing at the same time, that sort of, sort of sparked my memory to ask you if you were in a band or had a mentor, either in Arkansas or Oklahoma State, that basically said this is not about some formula thing where first this, a repertory thing, first this and then this and then this and then we're done with the tune. It was, if you're so inspired, then now's your time to speak up.
Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying. I hadn't ever, in my experience, run across that until Little Feat. None of the situations I was ever playing in had as a looser format where you were allowed to do that. In the big bands, in the Dixieland bands like we're talking about, that's generally kind of called the shout chorus, where it's just everybody's raging, at the end of the arrangement at some point.
So it's at the end of the tune. It's at the end of the tune, you think? Yeah.
Yeah, usually it'd be toward the end of the tune when it's just rocking. But that would mostly in big bands and stuff, that would be written out, but it would wild towards the end of the song, building the excitement up. But Yeah, I can. Gil Evans, was more of a modern dude, and would say stuff like that, like Charlie Mingus would talk about how you play it. But traditionally, most of the time people would not be doing that. But it certainly is a valid concept, and has now become a lot more used by everybody now that would do it. But back when Gil and when Tom was playing with. He went to North Texas same time I was down there. We used
Oh
to play
my God, that's with Billy Harper and all those. That's right, dude.
Yeah, we were.
Oh
all
my,
down
you were
there
in the
at
lab
same
band.
time. My
This
friend
is
James
unbelievable.
But we were in a society band called. Occasionally, we would play society gigs with Sammy Incardona and his orchestra all around Texas, Army bases and Air Force bases and stuff. But all kinds of people would play with this guy because you got like $15 a gig, and beer was only a nickel in the bases. If you went to play an officers club base, a glass of beer would only cost you a nickel. So it was you'd have a wild weekend. Most of the times we would finish the 2-day run, and Sammy would say, "You owe me $5," instead of him paying us. But
you drank all my beer. Yeah, no, that's so great.
But it was fun. But yeah, that is a more of an experimental approach when Gil Evans was doing that sort of thing, and his philosophy, which I think is absolutely right on and was ahead of its time. And now it's definitely more used than it would have been.
Do you think it's used? I mean, to me, it's like at that time, Gil had the aforementioned Tom Bones Malone. He had Billy Harper. He had Howard Johnson. He had some serious David Matthews or some cat was in that band. I mean, I guess going back to Anders and you and Fred, how do you allow? How is it possible for two cats to take off soloing without a traditional rhythm instrument with like a bass? Like how do you keep it together so it doesn't become a mess?
It's all about listening, and it's like a call and response. You hear if I hear Paul play something, I'll play something in answer to it, or there are a lot of, and then we'll start kind of playing on that theme together. Like maybe it's kind of not a real traditional harmony, but an attempt at harmony where like if he's playing low and I'll start playing high.
Right,
right. If I see him moving his hand down, I'll start moving up. If he starts moving up, I'll start moving down,
Love
and
it.
that kind of thing. You just sort of make it up as you go along, which is what improvising is. But that's you just listening is the whole key to music, and especially in improvisation, and listening to what's going down is the whole thing. So if you're playing together at the same time, you really have to listen.
What like could you talk a little bit about the how quickly or how, I don't know what the right word is, but when Bill was encouraging you to stretch out, how long did it take you to all sort of sync up and feel like you were, at least what you were doing was acceptable and not, just wanking it?
Oh, about 3 hours and 45 minutes. That's what Bob Dylan would say. I don't know. It's just, it's something that we gradually started doing, and it got comfortable. It's just something that we, got more comfortable doing. And as we were, playing with other jam band guys, as we'd be jamming with other jam band guys, like Anders, we would, start doing it and become more comfortable with it. And as we became more comfortable with it, it was easier to do, and we got into it. But, I don't know how long it took. It was just a gradual thing.
But it was really the first it was something, God, I'm going to mispronounce this, Mephistopheles, that band was not one of those kinds of bands?
No, Mephistopheles.
Mephistopheles, thank you. Right.
And stuff like that. Flames coming out of my head. Even though our music was pretty pop oriented, you know. But that was the thing. Yeah, no, that band was, individual soloists playing guitar. There's going to be a guitar solo, and there's going to be a piano solo and stuff like that, arranged.
I want to read you this quote and then find out where you fit into all this, because to me it's all fascinating. I'm sure you worked with this cat, John Morell, the guitar player, and he said, I did a bunch of dates with Phil Spector one time. There were 4 guitars and 2 drummers, Keltner and Blaine, 2 or 3 bass players. They would just start the song and everybody would contribute whatever they could contribute to make it happen. When it was 4 guitar players playing at once, we all tried to find the thing that we did the best. I was more of a rhythm player in those days. I played on the Dukes of Hazzard television show. Fred Werner, who was a writer, would write me all the acoustic guitar parts and Pretty Little Things. Larry McNeely would play the banjo. J.D. Mathis would be playing all the steel guitar parts. We all just fell into our own positions. And written music for television was huge at that time. And, I remember David T. Walker talking about, too, when 4 guitar players were playing at one time, he was always interested in doing what he did differently so he would actually be able to stand out. And you mentioned in our other interviews, you played mandocello, you played the mandolin, you played a variety of different string instruments. So could you talk about, experience in the studio when you're playing with 4 guitars and what you did, or 4 different string instruments and what you did, not in an ego way, but what you did in order to accentuate your niche?
Well, I played on I used to do the Dukes of Hazzard show as well with John. In fact, all the guitar players in town were rotating through that.
I just put me back in that time. Just put me back.
And the thing was that there was very crowded studio, because we did the Dukes of Hazzard live with the whole, with the strings and the horns, everybody there. It wasn't like the rhythm section came in and did basic tracks and then they did a string date. The Dukes of Hazzard was just like everybody that was going to be on it was there at the same time. So it was a crowded situation. You'd have some 6 guitar players, along with the banjo and the steel guitar. There'd be, like you said, 4 other guys. And I remember Lee Rittenauer and I would both did the show together a lot, and we sat next to each other. And the deal, what we would pretty much do was switch up guitars. Like I would play a 12-string, and someone would play just a straight steel string, and someone would play maybe a nylon string guitar, or maybe someone would play a high-string guitar, which is just the high strings of a 12-string, So it would be different guitars that sounded like, that would sound different, so they would be distinguished. But the idea of the rhythm of the guitars was not to set them out. It was more like Phil Spector did, was to have a big guitar sound, this giant sound. So it wasn't like you're trying to make yourself individual. You were trying to blend with this group of 6 guys to put out this one big sound. And the funny thing about it was such a crowded situation that instead of all of us sitting there with 5 guitars in front of us, a high string, a 12-string, a nylon string guitar, maybe a mandolin, a ukulele, whatever, all these guitars sitting in your little booth, and we were, like I said, it was very crowded. So instead of all of us bringing out all these guitars, we would trade. Like if I was gonna, the next cue, we would pass like a 12-string guitar over to somebody else, or the regular guitar. So we would use like kind of the shared instruments so that there wouldn't be so much clutter. The only thing that was funny was Lee Rittenauer and I both had a real lot of acidic hands. Like you ever see Louis Armstrong play the trumpet, he pulls a napkin, a handkerchief, because, in my hands, if I hold a trumpet, it's literally, you start sweating, it literally rots, rots the lacquer off and eats through the metal. And that's what happens with guitar strings. So Lee had that kind of thing, and I had that kind of thing. Millions of people do, but everybody else in the guitar section knew that, and so they wouldn't let either of us. Lee and I would trade guitars between the two of us because the other guitar players wouldn't let us play their guitars.
Yeah, no. When I was a kid, we used to
kill their strings.
Yeah, no, they'd say you have cooties or something. It was all greasy.
Yeah. So Lee and I would sit next to each other and trade guitars back and forth.
So I want to be clear. The different types of strings would help being able to delineate or sort of create spaces for each. To me, it's confounding. I understand if you're doing it, a single overdub at one time, first Tackett, then Rittenauer, then Morel, but that wasn't the case. I mean, I'm just trying to figure out how they were able to record it or delineate between the different, and you're saying that it was the types of strings that you were all using were different.
Well, no, I'm saying that the actual type of guitar was different. The idea was to achieve a blend, just like in a band with horns. If you have 4 trumpets or 4 saxophones, you're trying to get a blend. You don't want them to all sound separate. When you hear Woody Herman's 4 Brothers play, there's like a blend of that sound. It's not like you hear each individual guy.
That's right. That's right.
So that was what the idea behind all the multiple guitars would be with Phil Spector and with him. It was to get this blend and have this big giant sound that didn't sound like a guitar necessarily. I mean, it would sound like a guitar, but it would sound like a guitar that nobody had really heard before. It's sort of like when Paul and I play together sometimes. It sounds like one instrument, but not like any instrument you really hear anybody play because it's 2 instruments.
Yeah, I love it, man.
So that's the idea. The idea is to not stand out, but to get a blend. And it would be like, playing a nylon string gets a different sound than a 12 string, And so you just put them together and it gets a blended sound. It becomes synchronicity. It becomes a different sound. You add chemicals. It's like a chemical reaction. You put those 2 sounds together, and they make a third sound.
This is why I love talking to Fred Tackett. Given the State of the Union here on Tuesday morning, was there? Hal Blaine told me there was a time when he was doing a soundtrack. I forget the name, but it was an Indian, or at least there was a scene where they needed to create that tabla sound, and he went into the back of Universal Studios, and there were no tablas, and he actually had to actually make an instrument. I forget exactly how he did it, but he created this sound on the drums there was this huge arsenal of instruments. I think it was at Universal, where you could go into this room and there was just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of instruments. I mean, did you ever have to sort of make something, create a sound that they were looking for, and they didn't necessarily have that particular instrument, so you had to sort of just be, have some ingenuity and build something on the fly?
Well, not particularly. If sometimes people would have, Van Dyke Parks would probably come to mind as the guy who I would become closest to that kind of a situation. Sometimes you would change your tunings and stuff to make a guitar sound different, and things like that. But I never had to build one.
No, let me. I want to read.
What I'm talking about is there's all these percussionists, on each, some of those dates you might have Emil Richards and somebody else, and they would come in. Emil had 1,000 different things, and they had all these big cartridge cases just full of stuff. You wouldn't necessarily ever use it, but they would bring all this stuff. The cartridge companies would bring, and Hal Blaine invented cartridge companies. He had a guy named Rick who he would hire to carry his drums around for him, and then he would charge the producers, the record company, for having the guy, and then that became, everybody started going, what? And so cartridge companies were born, people that would carry your stuff from one gig to the next,
Well, yeah, because Morel was carrying around dozens of string instruments, and he had 12 guitars in his trunk, I'm sure you did too at one point. It was This is what the direct quote was from Hal. He said, "We were always behind barriers. The drummer had a booth called the Shelly Man booth, so that the leakage wasn't too bad. The percussionists were behind me. It looked like the Great Wall of China. These barriers were put up so we didn't leak into the orchestra in front of us. At one point, the producer came back to talk with me. He said, 'Look, drummer, there's a scene coming up where people are being paraded in a push cart in downtown New Delhi. We're going to do some music of India, so be sure to get yourself some Indian drums.' We were on a break, so I went into the music room, and that's the one thing they didn't have was tablas. So what did I do? I took a handkerchief, and I put it over my small tom-tom. I loosened the head a little bit and got this thuddy sound. I could raise the handkerchief at times, and I'm using my fingers and this one stick playing what I thought was Indian music while the band was playing what they were playing. We finished the scene in one take, and when we finished, the producer said, 'Don't leave the drums. I need to talk with you.' I'm thinking to myself, oh boy, I must have really screwed up. This guy came running over and said, 'Hal, that's the best tabla work I've ever heard. It made the scene just perfect.'" So, I mean, that's kind of what the idea of like, I don't know, just changing the tone, changing the ability, the timbre, changing the, did somebody ever come to you and said, we need this kind of sound, and you figured out a way to make it happen on an instrument that wouldn't normally make that kind of sound?
Yeah, no, most of the time, the best example I had of that was I started playing with a pencil,
Well, a pencil.
I had kind of a nickname as the Pencil Man. Back during the disco, I did a lot of stuff because I was doing and in a lot of those cases, I didn't have someone come up to me and saying, "Can you find this sound?" I would present stuff to them, like I would just play with this different thing, and they would go, "What are you doing?" And I'd say, "It's that," and they'd either go, "Yeah, I like that," or "Don't do that anymore." But that's the kind of situation I had. I was doing a horn arrangement for Bonnie Raitt's Home Plate record, and I'm sitting at this little table with my electric guitar and a pencil and paper, and I'm writing out horn parts, and I wanted to check out how something sounded. So instead of putting the pencil down and picking up a pick, I just reached down and hit the guitar strings with the pencil, and I went, "Wow, that's a cool percussive instrument." And then I had this you're talking about tablas. I had a effects box called a Small Stone that was was out back in the 70s, and
this is great.
When you put it on this one, there was like a one setting that was kind of normal, like a normal chorus sounding, but there was another setting that kind of had this like weird sound to it, like a kind of a rising whoop kind of a sound when you played it. And I found that when I hit it with the pencil, it sounded just like a tabla drum.
Oh my! Are you kidding? So
with that kind of sound. But that was just totally accidental, But that was one of the things that I would do. And there's a tradition of people doing that. A lot of guys. My friend Steve Ripley, who just passed, he used to play with a spoon. There's an old blues thing.
Yeah, no,
with a metal spoon.
But you're talking about actually like hitting
it by accident.
You're talking about like actually, like hitting it as if the pencil's a drumstick. You're not picking the guitar at that point. You're just hitting it.
Yeah, just like you see. Sometimes old days used to see a jazz guy. You see a Dixieland guy. You see a drummer reach over to the bass player and play the drumsticks on the upright bass.
Exactly.
And do
exactly.
The whole thing. It was a whole different sound, and that was the same kind of thing.
W.S. Holland did that, I think, with Johnny Cash. It's just like, it's so inventive. We have a game on this program. We've done it before. Name That Voice. I want to play this for you, and then have you come back and extrapolate on it.
The music really does. Music is still probably one of the best ways to transmit ideas. And so music still communicates, ideals and information extremely well. And there are a lot of people who love to do that. Part of our job is just to, make you feel good. Another part of our job is to take you on little voyages that 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 are a joy for you. And another part of our job is to inform you, not preach at you, but inform you, along with everything else. And it's really fun to do, man. It's a joy. I love doing it. Probably the best one was Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young doing Ohio. That was, I think, the high point of us doing the town crier, the hey, it's 12 o'clock and things have gone to hell in a basket and America is shooting its own children. That was probably one of the best, town crier moments that we had, and it's part of our job, to be the one that passes the news along. There have been other ones, many actually for me and my compatriots, but I think that was probably the most powerful one.
No. You have any idea who that is?
I'm guessing it's our boy David Crosby.
No, you got it, baby. Your boy. I mean,
it's just a process of elimination.
Yeah, well, he gave it away there.
He
with
sounds
the
like David more that he didn't sound English and he doesn't sound like Canadian.
That's right, dude.
Stills.
Oh man, good.
So it must be David.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to ask you about that. So he said part of our job is to make people feel good. Part of our job is to take you on little voyages, and part of our job is to inform. So I want to take you through those three different bullet points and reflected on Tackett, Barrere, on anything that you is that your philosophy? How does it differ? Just riff on that any way you want.
Well, no, I think David's right, spot on, man. Number one, as far as making people feel good, I mean, I don't know if you ever ran across Bob Palmer's book of Robert Palmer's The Brief Unruly History of Rock and Roll, but it was he wrote it as for the BB series about rock and roll years ago. It's a really good book. But the reason I bring it up is the preface of the book is he talks about how the early shows that he and I used to go play in honky tonks and road literally houses out in the middle of the woods in Arkansas where people would come, little clubs, and we'd go out and play. And they would come in and it would be, they just, I've been working all day and been this terrible thing. And so we'd start out playing, some kind of song like, I don't know, maybe Avenger's version of Malagueña or Perfidia or something like that. And then, we would see what happens. And then people were still sitting, on the bar. And then we would okay, let's try this. And we'd play a Jimmy Reed song, Got Me Running or something. And then, hey, maybe we got a reaction off that. The whole idea was to try to make people feel good because they were like, wow, I'm beat up from the feet up. And I think Garth Hudson pinned it the best when he said it was like the musicians are the angels of the honky tonk, because they do. That's their idea, is to come in and make people feel good after,
Well, the other line that the other line is
to go through.
Yeah, the other line is from Art Blakey. He said, My job is to wash away is for the patrons that come. It's my job to wash away the dust of everyday life for those cats that come to see me. But it was like uplifting music. The idea there was that. Okay, so that was in Arkansas, and then once you get them engaged and feeling good, then take us into the voyage part of it for Tackett, the voyages.
Well, that was back in those days. I was just if I could get people feeling good, that was about all it was to it. But yeah, when you're playing, sometimes when I'm playing, I'll start playing, licks that you don't normally hear on guitar, that you might hear Cannonball Adderley play more soul licks and stuff like that are kind of trying to inform people that may never have heard that kind of music in a different kind of music, like in a Little Feat song. And then I start playing more Hank Crawford type style than an Eric Clapton type style, and that's kind of let me show you where I come from.
I did.
Just
Wow.
like kind of basically showing you what my influences are and what I hear in my head as opposed to what you maybe have used to been hearing in your head all the time. And that all contributes to your style. And that word style to me, I mean, that's the whole thing. If you want to think style, I remember when I came to L.A., everybody wanted to play 335 Gibson 335s and sound like Larry Carlton, who was the best guitar player in California for sure, and maybe
Right.
and everybody wanted to do that. So I was more influenced by Mike Dacey, who I met through Hal Blaine and all those guys, and my wife went out and bought me a Stratocaster, so I could distinguish my sound was different from everybody else's, so when you're playing stuff and you're trying to show your influences and where you come from, you are, it's a part of your style. That's how you develop a style, is by informing the audience of your influences.
I mean, part of it was also like, I mean, do you remember definitively, like, I mean, I was going back to our second interview, and you were talking about Van Dyke Parks and just sort of how you would walk out of the studio in whatever state you were in, just like, what the hell did we just play? You weren't really sure what you played because there was no playback. And for a long time, even before that, you'd hear a song. I mean, I remember the Swamper David Hood from Muscle Shoals. He would say, all we could do was listen to the radio and sort of catch the jet stream of whatever the vibe of the tune. We couldn't rewind the tune, so you had to kind of just then you just did it your own way. So that was sort of how you developed your own style. And you're talking about actually a different guitar. Everybody was buying these guitars because I mean, at what point did we get to, because I mean, it seems to me like your generation especially, the last thing they wanted to ever hear was, hey, you sounded just like so-and-so. I mean, I don't know. I mean, maybe it would be a compliment to say you sounded just like Larry Carlton, but in some ways it just seems like you guys all wanted to have your own distinct sound. And, you said you went out and got a different guitar, Stratocaster. Were there other ways that you went about developing your own individual sound?
Yeah, just from the way you played. Like I was a self-taught guitar player because I was a trumpet player and then a drummer, and then guitar came later, and then I really started concentrating on it. Like when I came to L.A. Otherwise, I'd been a drummer most of the time. And so yeah, I was just. I was lucky in the fact that I, was kind of just grabbing in the dark to figure out what to do. And so I sort of developed my own thing, which is like, but the idea of everybody getting to sound like Larry Carlton was the fact that people, jingle producers, movie soundtrack guys, even record producer guys weren't so much interested in making stuff sound different. They wanted stuff to sound alike. They wanted to go, wow, I want this to sound just like the Steely Dan record, and and stuff like that, because that's really popular. So give me something like that. And so people would, naturally imitate, Larry Carlton because he was the cat. And so it was like, I can
Dean
do that.
Parks,
I can sound like
yeah,
Larry
right.
Carlton, and then I'll get a gig,
That's interesting. I mean, this is I want you, because I mean you're talking about. I mean, you came into the studio scene at a time when I mean it seemed to me that a lot of Lowell George or Bonnie Raitt or Bruce Springsteen or James Taylor. There was an investment made within the artist before they got any quote unquote pop hits. Before they made any radio play hits, and then this is from Mike Clark, who was the drummer with Herbie in the Headhunters, and he said when Herbie made Man-Child, I was amazed at how commercial and straight it was, and this was 1975. He said I said we sound like a band who needs a singer. We sound like a backup band. people were starting to use terms like keep it in the pocket. Drummers were starting to play straight beats. Instead of improvising, they were relegated to playing fills. Whatever fills were on a hit record, other drummers would have to copy them. I've always been a jazz musician, so I was like, no, I don't want to go in this direction in my life. I don't care who was going in that direction. I didn't want to go. Herbie said, well, we're going to make these records. Why don't you do a couple as the Headhunters, because the band's not going to last forever. I mean, do you remember definitively, you talked about the disco years, your studio career was absolutely on fire. Your studio career was on fire during the late 70s, or what I consider when the drum machine came in and when disco came in. But talking about these, like you said, play something that's like this because it's popular. Was that?
Oh, absolutely.
When did that? I mean,
I was saying,
yeah.
With everybody buying the 335s, because my friend Neil Steubenhouse, bass player, used to say they like what they see, and if you come walking in with a different guitar than you had used the last time, the producers get real nervous. Like, what is that? You're changing it. Don't change anything.
Right, yeah, it's what you see, right.
They want it to be like, yeah, and I remember those Herbie Hancock records. They were deliberately made to be commercial and funky. I mean, they were very funky, but it wasn't like Herbie Hancock with Miles.
It wasn't like the M1D. It was, and I mean, it speaks to this whole. I just wanted to know about, like, again, you were punching the clock, making bread, doing well, not really going on the road per se, but you were an in-demand studio musician. But when did you, in your mind, if you step back, I mean, Herbie met with M1D Band, which was a spiritual band. I mean, that was Buster, Julian Priester, Billy Hart, Eddie Henderson, Herbie, and Benny Maupin. And, they were playing they would open with 20 minutes of African percussion before they would go into some long, long tune, and you had waitresses shushing the customers because it was that kind of spiritual music. And then at a certain point, they opened for the Pointer Sisters at the Troubadour, and it kind of dawned on Herbie, wow, I want to do that because it's actually commercial. And maybe I can make, and he wasn't making a lot of bread with the other band. When did the bottom line come into play? I guess, when did the greed factor come into play in your mind as it relates to popular music? Because now, so it's cool to say, play something like what Dean Parks played on this tune, or Larry Carlton played on this tune. But now, Fred, at least in my mind, I mean, setting aside the Anders Osborns and the Fred Tacketts and the, a bevy of people, I mean, I hear now just a complete homogenization of sound in 2019. I can't tell who people are. And it seemed like, I just wanted to know if you ever got to that point where you started saying, hey, man, this is all sounding the same.
Well, it depends on who you're working for. You mentioned like people like Bonnie and Jackson and different, Lowell George and all these. These are artists that were individualists and did, they were a step above what I'm talking about, which is like, your Giorgio Moroder sessions. And, the artist, God only knows who the artist was. I couldn't tell you
right.
the names of them. There's people, people
exactly.
that were singing on top of this disco track. And every disco, they all sounded the same. And it was, it was meant to sound the same. And it's supposed to sound the same. And that goes, that has been going on forever. And, within a genre of music, within rock and roll, you got like certain bands that sound real straight, and then other bands that didn't sound real straight. It depends on what they were trying to achieve. But I don't know if there's a specific moment when people decided they want to make some more money, but that's a thing that happens, and you decide, well, I can make a really commercial record, and it's a kind of can I do what it is that I do, but make it so that everybody will like it and buy it. Frank Lowell and I used to talk about, and with Richie Hayward too, about Frank Zappa and how he wanted hit records, but he wanted them on his own terms, So, and Lowell was the same way. He wanted, Lowell was always looking for a hit record. It's Easy to Slip was, his, to me, although we never, it wasn't written in stone, written down anywhere, but to me, from talking to him and doing everything, that Easy to Slip was made as a, folk rock. He wanted to cash in on that, And the thing was, we probably never did. And Zappa, he finally got, Valley Girl with his daughter, and he got himself this hit record. But Lowell, so people are trying to be commercial. People want to be successful. People want to have a nice house. People don't want to have to live the jazz life if they don't have to.
No, I know they don't want to be a starving genius. I get that. It's just I don't think that's.
And that's, to me, that's the motivation for all of that.
I mean, to me,
and there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, there's great pop records and there's great jazz records. There is a whole different ball of wax. Dean and I have talked many times about people coming with demos of songs to play on a, if let's say a Linda Ronstadt session or something that you're going to do, and you got somebody's Andrew Gold's demo of a tune he wrote, and he'll probably have some more outrageous guitar on it and stuff like that. And I remember we'd be listening to it, and Dean would say, "Well, do you want to like match the demo, or do you want to like do a pop record? Because on a pop record, guitar players don't do that, And so which which do you want to do?" And they would make the decision. But because it's a different ball of wax altogether. Trying to make a pop single or to make a album cut, as it were. It's just your choice of what you're trying to do. Some people are just trying to make a really great pop record. And there isn't going to be a guitar solo on it, like you said. Like everything sounds the same these days, which I couldn't really tell you what it all is all because and that scene anymore. But
well, I think it has to do with the fact. I just think it has. Well, no, I mean, I mean, and this is, I don't want to be too generalized here, but I just feel like foundationally, I mean, there's nothing you can really do about the fact that, you guys your foundation, you had a huge bag of tunes. Your vocabulary was huge in all different genres of music. And like Byron Berline told me, he always talks to fiddlers about having a bag of licks, because the thing is, you could take, because of knowing all those tunes, you could take some of those licks and incorporate them into other tunes. That's just one thing, but the roots of your upbringing were R&B and rock and jazz, and so now you listen to younger cats who are improvising. They might play complete improvised music for a full set or both sets, and some of it's really cool, and they get into a great groove, and then you begin to hear the same. It sounds the same. It just starts to sound the same again. And to me, that just speaks to a lack of musical vocabulary. And I'm not really sure. I just think part of it has to do with the supply and demand thing. People don't have a chance. There's no real touring circuit, so to speak. You're not on the bandstand relentlessly every night where you're in all these different acoustic environments. So people get all polished up. They get their band ready to play. They turn up the volume to 10. And then they play, and there's no dynamics. I mean, there's no. They're playing at the same frequency, and it's like at that point, there's not a lot of listening going on. So that's my little take on it. But Richie
used to always say, "Don't use the D word, man. That's a dirty word."
What's the D word? What's the D word?
Richie, man, full on. Richie, if you were playing, Willin', or you were playing Day at the Dog Races, Richie went full bore. That was just the way he was. He turned Richie on as full bore. When someone would say, "Hit your tom-tom," sound check, he'd go bang, 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 and half of them would be clicking on the edge of the drum. I mean, half of them wouldn't even hit the drum. He was just wild. I used to call him the Elvin Jones of rock and roll, because if he was playing Willin', he'd still be going boom, whap, like he was playing a heavy metal song, even though it was a country song. That's just, that was his thing. And you'd say, hey, calm it down a little bit. He'd go, don't use that D word, man. I don't believe in dynamics. I don't know it. I don't play soft.
No,
He
but
used to say,
no,
I
no,
hate
no.
that
I mean, he
LA
might have been.
tippy tappy drum stuff. That that LA sound, man. That tippy tappy sound.
I dig it. But he in his own. I mean, even when you were first collaborating with him in the studio, you listened to live Little Feat, and maybe he didn't want to play soft the whole time, but there were dynamics all over the place in those Alan Toussaint covers. That's what makes those songs so hypnotic. I mean, Gradney comes out of he's like a Loch Ness monster that comes out of the sea, because that's the thing. I don't think that Richie was a real, he didn't have a lot of language he wasn't overly talkative on the drums. And he clearly...
Yeah, no, Richie just had his own thing, man, and that's, he invented. That's why so many drummers love him, because he just invented this whole thing. Because he was an artist. He was a painter, a drawer. Drew all these incredible pictures and stuff. He went to art school. He's one of those art school musicians,
So many of those cats, man. All of them,
how
man.
to play drums and became this thing, But it was totally original, totally original what he did. But if there was dynamics, it was because Lowell had somehow manipulated him into doing it somehow or another.
No, you said that last time, that they would literally just they'd duke it out on stage, they'd be throwing punches at each other on stage. So Lowell got his point across.
Well, not on stage, but I remember there was a famous one where they were playing. I think that the stuff that was on that's on Waiting for Columbus from the Rainbow Room in London, because
right.
They were going up the stage, and Richie would never play the same thing twice. And Lowell would spend endless time, developing a part that Richie would play. And Richie would, they'd do it, and they'd get it together in the studio, and they'd record it, and then they'd go to play the song, and Richie would play something entirely different. And Lowell would say, play what you did on the record. And Richie would go, what?
I love it so much, man.
He was living in the now. I'm going to play what I'm playing now. I don't know what I played back then. That's, back then. I don't even know what that was.
Oh.
And so they were going up the stairs, and Lowell was furious at him. Was hitting there, the blows, and Billy was going, guys, stop it, listen. The crowd was going crazy, they loved it. And so we're going to go back and play some more, so stop beating each other up. Everybody's loving it. Stop it.
That's so interesting. I mean, that is so interesting.
Lowell and Richie.
Because you have
He tried to fire him once, man. He came back to my house and said, I just spent the whole night at the Troubadour, man. I had to fire Richie. And they got Freddie White from Earth, Wind, and Fire to play drums on, I think he plays on Spanish Moon. But he did one little tour, and then they were like, you got to get Richie back, man. And so,
wow.
Richie was always people would be giving him trouble, and he would say, I think the guys are going to fire me, getting dirty looks and stuff. I remember Lowell, when he hired Sam, told us, I want you to be, made the mistake of saying, I want you to be a governor on Richie, to keep the groove, keep it in the pocket.
Right.
And they would sit, and Sam would be glaring at him, going, "Get it in the pocket," and Richie would be going, "Screw you," or worse things of that. They'd be yelling back and forth at each other, because Richie was it was just like this fight between them. And so Richie we'd be talking. He'd say, "I think they're going to fire me," and I'd say, "Richie, you're the rock star of the band. You're on Modern Drummer every issue, man. You're the star of the band. Nobody's going to fire you. You're out of your mind."
What's interesting is what's fascinating is just the idea of the ego of the artist wanting it to be played a certain way. And
well, it's the composer, the composer wanting to have control over his composition, which, with Little Feat, you kind of have to give it up.
Yeah, I mean, were there really any of those kinds of artistic orchestrated issues when you joined Little Feat on tour once Lowell passed?
Oh, not too much. We would, straighten all the arrangement kind of things out as we were, rehearsing the song before we recorded and stuff. The whatever scene would be going down, and I don't, there's not really, I guess Richie probably caused the most controversy in trying to get him to do whatever somebody might want him to do, but that was not ever going to go anywhere. So it would just usually be dirty looks and stuff like that.
Right. So it was just, I love it.
No real attempt to try to make him do anything. It would just be like glaring at him, like, what are you doing?
And him just smiling back, saying, "This is just me being me, man. I love it, dude. I love it."
Exactly. He would just look at you and say, "Screw you, man. Just do it."
Just tell me in your mind how the drum machine has how the drum machine changed rhythm in music.
I don't know. Lowell, you had the first one. It was called a Donkomatic, and it had this cold, cold, cold. You hear this weird drum machine behind there, and I don't know. I guess it gave people control. People always want to have control, So it gave people control. They could, control what the drummer was doing, so they could be the drummer, which I never thought was a good idea, because you lost the groove. There's no, as Miles Davis said, it's all in between the notes. It's not the notes you're playing. It's what's going on in between the notes. And that's what happens with the drummer. You get a swing. You either swing or you don't swing. Even if you're playing straight A's rock and roll, there's a certain swing groove to it, and if you either got it or you don't, and drum machines don't have it. And so I guess on certain kinds of stuff, they even have like groove factors that kind of in drum machines that are supposed to kind of just put a certain percentage of randomness in the you programmed it to do to try to make it sound like a human. But there's a human thing. And
it's still not gonna cut it, man. I mean, wait, hold on.
It never does it.
No, when did Lowell? Because I know Sly Stone had an antiquated drum machine that in '71. When did Lowell first bring the drum machine in? I can't imagine Richie tolerating that at all.
Well, he played on top of it, but it was called a Donkomatic. Like I said, I think you hear it on Cold, 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 that record.
Donkomatic. A Donkomatic.
Yeah, it's called a Donkomatic.
Love that.
Crude little thing that had like one sound, But yeah, I think that was the first of it.
Well, what I mean, I guess more to the point is like how
if Lowell was alive today, you would have never seen him live anywhere. He would be in a room with an array of every electronic device it had, and he'd be fiddling with it, because he loved that stuff.
So, can I just be clear? I mean, assuming, let's just say, I mean, he was obviously, abusing drugs. I mean, it was kind of across the board. It was just a kind of a chaotic time. But you're telling me that he was just becoming more and more insular as an artist, even if he had cleaned up and he just would have gotten farther and farther away from the intimacy of humans playing music. He just would be totally absorbed in his own world.
Yeah, I think he would have definitely gotten into, because he loved to, he was a beautiful arranger, composer, and so he loved having that complete control over all the sounds and fiddling with them. I just think that, and he hated traveling, so trying to play live was a real pain in the butt, and trying to, and traveling was horrible, and because of his lifestyle and everything. So, nobody wants to try to score on the road.
Well, it's a precarious. I mean, Miles used to get. I remember he'd bring pot over, got busted in Japan, and the whole tour fell apart. That's traveling internationally, but I mean. It's. I guess here's the other part of the.
Yeah, I think he would have been in a room, man. I think he would have been in a room, building tracks, man.
I like your honesty. It's also a little bit depressing to me. But no, you know what it is?
It's a different thing, man. He liked to, he liked really simple. I mean, he would be, he liked pretty basic tracks and stuff, and didn't like, he and Billy would be at odds over, Billy wanted to overdub stuff and do more things, and playing with Jimmy Webb all the time, and we were all good buddies. Well, Jimmy and I like overdubbed everything we could get our hands on, because it was just fun. And Lowell would be, don't throw in the kitchen sink, man. Just keep it simple. Keep it like, a bass and the guitar and the singer and the drums and, da-da-da-da. You don't need all that other stuff. And so that was kind of where he was coming from. And what made Little Feat what it was the combination of that, kind of like tension between the different guys in the band wanting to do what they wanted to do as opposed to what just Lowell. If Lowell just did what he wanted to do, then it would be sort of like I guess like his solo record, like people were little guitars and stuff is all he was trying to make a pop record, which failed miserably.
Yeah.
Probably didn't promote it at all because you still listen to that record and it's really good, but there aren't guitar solos, a lot of guitar solos on it. It's pretty much, really rigidly arranged the way it was going to be,
Which album are you talking about?
Thinks I'll Eat It Here.
So I mean, even with Heffington, like he just struggled with people, drummers in general. He just really had a hard time with drummers.
No, he loved Don, because Don would play.
Yeah, Don would play exactly what they rehearsed.
A lot quieter than Richie, and Lowell would say, "Jesus, I can sing. I can sing when Don plays the drums. I can actually hear myself sing, man." And stuff. Because Don has that incredible ability to play, not as loud, but has that intensity. It's a rock and roll drummer, but it's not like overbearingly killing you, And it's a real, it's magic, man. How do you get that intensity without being loud?
Well,
he knows how to do.
No, I mean, the other part about the drum machine is the idea that it's so prevalent now. Do you ever get into it? Do you ever wind up I mean, I know you're not in the studios, but I've talked to other cats who, from your generation, and they're in one room and they hear this drum, these beats going on, and they say that's got to be a machine, and they walk in and it's a human being playing machine parts. And I find that to be very dangerous just for humanity's sake, because I mean, you got to be yourself. I mean, if you can't detect if you're playing what a machine's playing, I mean, to me, that's music that's made for pacification. You listen to Philly Joe Jones, you can't, on one side of the record, there's nothing pacifying. Maybe there's certain passages that are, but it's so him that your own internal time is grooving to it as well. And that's the point, is that, to me, there's one of the issues is just this. I don't know what the right word is. I mean, in terms of jazz, again, genres are a big deal, but there's just a homogenization of sound now that I hear. It sounds just very much the same, and part of it is also just the attitude. Like, I mean, Van Dyke Parks. I transcribed that little bit this morning when you talked about going in and. Basically, you had no creative control over what you played. You were like, I don't know what I just played. That was a train wreck. And then, basically, it was up to him to splice it together into something pretty amazing. And
it'd be like found music.
Exactly.
We would leave these. The idea was that there was only a certain amount of time. There was only a short amount of time that we had in the studio. That because studio time costs a lot of money, and people weren't putting out a lot of money in budgets for Van Dyke Records. So he had like a lot of stuff, a lot of material he wanted to get done, and only a certain amount of hours to do it in. And so you would just go through this stuff, and like I said, he would talk to you while you were recording. He would say things to you to inspire you, like, honor your father, Fred. Honor your father.
Burn, Fred. Burn. Honor your father, Fred.
or he'd say Black Bakersfield, you know, and I would go, okay, I'll play kind of some kind of a half-assed country, and funky, you know. And you just go through your head instantly what he was saying to you and do something, and no time to listen back to it. So he would always, and he told me this, you know, it's like you come back in the next day and, you know, put it on and go, well, see, that part there sounds really good, and that part's really good, and that part's completely messed up. So screw that part, and he'd build a song and build the arrangement out of what, you know, found music, what we had in there that was good, you know. And I do that a lot too when when you're cutting and pasting. Lowell did that a lot as well, you know, cutting and pasting the good parts together and making something different, you know.
Do you think that, like, I mean, today, I guess all I'm saying is when I think
the guy who's building a drum machine part, to him that's perfect. To you and I, that's like, you know, there's no soul in it, there's no swing in it, there's no kind of groove to it. To us, it sounds homogenized. But to the guy who's doing the drum machine part, he thinks it's perfect. You know, it's just the philosophy you have towards it.
Do you you and Paul take the Miles Davis approach of there are no wrong notes, so that, you know, you hit a clam and you and Paul both know it, but then you go, I mean, the audience won't know it if you both go in that direction. How do you deal with imperfection on stage? Part of what I'm getting at is just this whole fascination with the technology, the ability to make things quote unquote perfect. In that way, it's completely sterile. So how does Fred Tackett? Go ahead.
I think Thelonious Monk said, "Wrong is right." You know,
That's right. That's right.
Was our philosophy, you know, wrong is right, man. It's how you resolve it. You know, it's like, okay, I hit that big note. Do I just ignore what I just played and go back to what it is, or do I take that note and use it as a leading tone? We used to joke, we call it, Mike Davesy would say, that's a leading tone, man. It's going, it's moving the next beat. That's not a mistake. It's a leading tone.
I see, Dacey. That is genius.
But, you know, you can philosophize, you can theorize and take it and say, okay, that's really that's a, you know, the raised leading tone, fifth going up to the so-and-so and so-and-so, and make it okay. But I think what happens when you play something that's, you know, unexpected, I wouldn't call it wrong, but you play something that you weren't intending on playing, and then you figure out, okay, how do I resolve that? You know, where do I go with that to make it right, you know? And it's the next note that comes after the mistake is the answer. You either go, you know, make this abrupt shift back to like, oh, that was a mistake, and go back to what you're doing, or you kind of continue on with it, like kind of like, I meant to do that.
Exactly. Well, and see, that to me is what David Crosby was, I mean, in his own way. But when I hear about the voyages, that's when the voyage takes place, is when you have the confidence and the vernacular to make a mistake and then go there, because then you're out of your element too, as opposed to going back to your comfort zone.
Yeah, you're right.
You know, I mean, that's just, as a fan, that's what it is. And I mean, you know, did you like, what was your well, I just interviewed Dennis Coffey, you know, ridiculous dude.
Man.
Freaking greatest.
Mr. Motown.
Mr. Motown. But then he was out at Mo West, and that, you know, like, and I'm like, God, I just want to believe that Tackett. So anyway, this is what the Funk Brothers did. I want you to then extrapolate on how close this ever got with Van Dyke Parks or any of the cats, any of the producers and engineers you worked with. But he said, we were this. So the interesting thing is, what I've found now is that a lot of people are laying vocal tracks in pop music, and then putting the rhythm section under that or over that. But in Motown, he said Jamerson and the bass player and all the guitar players plugged into a big direct box above the speaker cabinet against the wall. We were all direct, straight to tape, period. We were all plugged into the monitor speaker, and that volume was controlled by the studio. You could only get it so high. I used to play with the speaker behind me and a headset on. I'd take part of the headset off one of my ears so I could hear the speaker behind me, And in the other headset, I could hear the tracks as they were going on tape. If I used some effect, it went from my guitar to my effects straight to the board. The two drummers were mic'd with overheads, and they had kick drums mic'd. You'd have three guitars and a bass, all direct. Bongo Eddie Brown and Jack Ashford were usually standing right behind me, right in front of me. Earl Van Dyke was playing a grand piano in one corner, and then Johnny Griffith was on an organ in the other side of the room. In the overdub room, Jack Brokenshaw was on vibes. That was the nucleus of what they had. And the point is that those 11 cats laid those rhythm tracks down before the Temps or the Four Tops or the Spinners or anybody came in. Those rhythm tracks were locked down. Can you make an analogous example to work you did in Hollywood?
Well, yeah, that was the way. That was pretty much the method protocol for doing it. I never was in a situation where they had a vocal track and then you built a backing track for it. It was always, we're doing the, piano, bass, and drums and guitars, and then they're going to put on the vocals. The vocals are a whole other thing. Or sometimes the vocals would sing along with you simultaneously, but most of the time it'd be, they're doing what they would call a scratch vocal. They're in a room somewhere and they're singing along. This was, and I was just thinking when you were talking about that, when I went to work with Bob Seger, we got to go. We were rehearsing for 3 weeks in Detroit, and we got to go to Motown and go through a tour of the studio. I don't know if you've ever been there or not, but it's an amazing
not
thing
yet.
to see.
I can't wait.
It's two residential houses next to each other.
Really?
Two residential houses next to each other with a walkway upstairs, like over the driveway between the two houses, or the walkway, so you could go between one house and the other. And when you went into the studio, the control room was this tiny little room, and the studio where the guys were playing looked like like a standard bedroom. I mean, it was tiny, small, and everything was. They had a set of vibes, they had a set of drums, they had pianos, and so these guys were all like shoulder to shoulder, crammed in front of one another. It wasn't like spacing between like a large recording studio. I mean, these guys were jammed in there together, man, and did what they did. And what they did was, they got their own thing because they were off in Detroit. They weren't being influenced by anybody else, and they just, they did what they did, and they did what they did. I thought when they moved to Los Angeles that it was, even though Eddie Green was probably one of the finest drummers ever, probably saved their ass, really, because otherwise it wasn't as good as it was in Detroit.
Well, it's really funny you say that. Yeah, you're 100%. You're interesting because Gadsden also was pretty badass for Motown as well. But the thing is, that's what Dennis said. He said that Berry Gordy had all those cats under contract in Detroit. And so when he wanted to do movie production and all that stuff in L.A., and Dennis said it would have behooved him to actually RCA and they wanted to build studios in Detroit, but Barry left on his own fruition to go to Los Angeles. So those guys were kind of left. They were left holding. There was a note on the door saying closed. Dennis was already.
They were just left high and dry.
They were left high and dry, and so that regional sound was gone. Even though Jamerson came out there, and a few cats did go to the left coast, it did have a different sound because you didn't have the same 11 cats just cranking on those albums.
Yeah.
So you lost that.
Yeah, I mean, Alan Toussaint came out to Los Angeles, made a record with the A-Team, had Jeff Beccaro and all these guys. I don't even know what the record was called or if it ever even came out. But it wasn't like, it wasn't Alan Toussaint in New Orleans, There used to be regional sounds. There was a new sound that came out of New Orleans. There was a Detroit sound. There was Chicago. There was New York. There was L.A. And then, whatever's in the South. I could maybe Atlanta.
Atlanta.
Muscle Shoals. Yeah. But back in the days before Muscle Shoals, there was Muscle Shoals is definitely a regional sound in that group, but they all disappeared and became, homogenous. Now these guys are still making records down there in Muscle Shoals. I don't know if anybody pays attention to that particular sound, but there was definitely regional sounds. You knew if a record came out from New Orleans, it was a New Orleans record. If it came out of L.A., Don and Dewey or whatever, it sounded like an L.A. record or a New York record or a definitely a Motown record. And that all got, homogenized because everybody wanted to be in Hollywood or New York City, and they all moved. It all became kind of one thing.
Well, I think also just full with full interconnection, these sounds were so unique to your environment, and a lot of cats were not necessarily, they might hear a pop hit on the radio, but they weren't. It's not like today where you can go on YouTube and there's just all this material. And also, you could look at the back of a ZZ Hill record, for instance, and you could see C-Sane Studios, and it was the Meters. That they were the rhythm section there. And then you go to Capricorn, and that was in Macon. And you go to Hollywood, or that's Tackett and Keltner, and you go to New York, and it was Gadd and Rainey and Purdy, and it was. The other, but I want to tell you something. I don't. Correct me if I think in today the humbling part for me is I've in talking to my peer group, a lot of singers today, because of the technology, they actually do the vocal parts and then lay down the rhythm stuff, because you can do that with electronic machines. You can meet,
sure, I'm sure you could.
And to me, that's adding to the issue. You already laid down a rhythm track with Pistol Allen and Jamerson and those guys. I mean, it would take the singers a minute to get it together. Some quicker than others, but they had to conform to those human rhythms as opposed to building in very sterile rhythms to, kind of just. Milk toast vocal. I'm not saying milk toast, but any vocal track's not going to have that same glow and warmth without human rhythm section. So it works both ways. And listen, technology is a tool and it's great, but the homogenation of sound is something that I am concerned about. Before I let you go, Tackett, can you give an update on what kind of gigs you're playing? I just need as much Fred Tackett in my life as possible.
Well, let me go to continue on just for a second with what you're talking about. A lot of that homogenation started happening when producers started moving, because the way records has changed over the years. At first, when I first started doing studio work, you would hire a band like Jackson Browne would call up and hire you for like 2 weeks for an album project, and the band would be, whoever was in the band, and that's who would be on the record, and then over the years, the style became like, I think I'm going to go to New York and do a couple of tracks with the New York guys, and then a couple of tracks with the L.A. guys, and a couple of tracks with these guys. And then you had this you still had a different thing. You could say, oh, that's the L.A. guys, and that's the New York guys. But then they started going where they would take the, track you did, and they would go to New York, and they'd overdub a guitar player in New York, or they'd go to Macon and overdub, Dwayne Allman or something onto dead, but you know what I'm saying? They would go get a guitar player, and all of a sudden it started becoming this mix of everybody, not separate. There wasn't like a separate group in L.A. playing and a separate group in Macon, Georgia playing. It was like a group of cats, playing together, but in different parts of the country.
Oh, but it was not. And I just want to be clear, because
I remember meeting Pete Carr. He said, "Yeah, we played on lots of records together, even though we'd never met."
Oh, that's funny.
Both had been playing guitars on the same records together.
So basically, so the point is that their parts on the record were overdubbed in their location and then cut and pasted into whatever track you were on in Los Angeles.
They'd bring the tracks. They'd bring the tracks with them to.
You nailed it. Because I'm telling you, there's an album I can't stop listening to. It's Odetta on Polydor, and it's all mixed. So both sides. It's not like one side is at Muscle Shoals and one side is Hollywood. It's all mixed together, and so you get the Muscle Shoals feel, and that's all the cats like Hawkins and Jimmy Johnson and those guys, and then the other tracks are like Bobby West, who used to play bass with the Crusaders back in the day, Russ Kunkel. So like you can really hear the California vibe with, and I love the California Odetta. More the Muscle Shoals is cool, but that is more nitty gritty the way Odetta is. But that California sound is, and that was all being done together. So the idea there is that when you start to take Pete Carr's solos and Chuck Leavell's solos, and you're sending them across the country for a record that with Tackett and whoever else, it's going to change the sound dramatically.
Yeah, exactly. That's what started. That became the style. It was just styles of recording over the years, and then it got to be where they would just overdub the drums. And they'd go put the bass player on in Paris, and somebody. So each individual was not even playing together. They were just like, I'm going to use this drummer here, and then I'm going to go. And a lot of guys will put out a drum machine part, and like you said, it's a guy playing the drum machine part. They're doing exactly, but they would just hire him to come in and play cymbals, not even the rest of the drum part, just the cymbal part, because they liked his cymbals, So it got really weird, got really weird.
Yeah, what is
different drummers playing different parts of the drums?
That's just. I mean, it's a conversation could take forever. What is now? I again, I'm always diving into the weeds here with Tackett, but what is this album? Punch, 1971. Blaine, Osborne, Knechtel, Rolls, Alcivar, Illingworth, Xavier, Dacey, Budimer, Tackett, Mike Anthony, 1971, self-titled album called Punch.
Wow, I don't even know what that is.
Are you kidding? I'm going to read from I'm going to send you this link, dude. I remember being a bit disappointed when I first listened to this lone LP by California act Punch. When I was in the record store holding it in my hands and scanning the sleeve for clues as to whether it would be a decent purchase, it seemed like I don't know what that word is. It appeared to have all the ingredients of a classic lost pop album. Firstly, the band themselves consisted of 2 female and male members, Kathy Ward, Dee Steele, Steve Adler, and Charles Merriam, all providing the vocals a la Mamas and Papas. Secondly, the session musicians listed on the album include some heavyweights that I just read through. The label, it was on A&M, had been churning out tones of easy listening, and they go through it. But I mean, if you don't have this in your record collection, you need to pick up a copy of Punch right away.
Okay, man. I just can't remember that at all, although I remember all those players. I can remember exactly happening. Those were the cats that I played with and when I first started. But you asked what's going down.
Yeah, what's going down, man? What's going down?
Start the Little Feat 50th anniversary. That's the gigs, man.
Whoa. There's 69, 68 is or 69 was the formulation of Little Feat?
Yeah, I'd say 68.
Oh, that's badass. All right, so what does that mean? What explain how that means in the conventional live music opportunities?
We're playing, Little Feat doesn't tour all that much anyway, but we are now playing with, we're playing the Beacon Theater, and we're playing in New York City, we're playing the Warner Theater, and we're playing the Ryman Auditorium.
Ah, dude, you guys are big shots now.
Yeah, we're playing Symphony Hall in Atlanta, where we usually play a little club in Atlanta. So instead of playing in the clubs that we normally play in, we're playing the hoity-hoity symphony halls and stuff. So it's a special thing, and the ticket sales seem to be going well, and it's going to be very exciting, man.
Do you have an idea of the? Are you going to be all over the country or just on the East? I mean, I see some stuff online, but I'm hoping you guys make a Southwest run.
Yeah, well, we're playing on the East Coast in March, pretty much down to Atlanta and Florida, and then we end up in Jamaica on our annual thing. And then in May, that's in March, but then in May, we're going to play West Coast, all of the West Coast, up in Seattle, Portland, California gigs, stuff like that. But we don't have any Tucson gigs booked yet, man.
All right, well, listen, I'm going to look at the tour schedule, and I'm going to find a nice little enclave to jump in on, and
yeah, man.
You know, it's always good to hang with you, Tag. Much love to you, brother.
Much love to you, man.
Keep swinging,
Much
baby.
love.
Yeah, baby. I'll see you sooner than later, man. And be safe on the road, and say hi to the fellas for me.
You bet your boots.
All right, dude. Later on. Be cool.
Talk to you later.
Later, man.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Fred Tackett, legendary musician and even better human being. That's it for now. I'll be back with Mike Theodore later this evening on the Jake Feinberg Show.
To Staten Island, Sharon, to buy myself a mandolin. And I saw the long white dress of love on a storefront mannequin. Big boat chugging back with a belly full of cars, all for something lacy. Some girl's gonna see that dress and crave that day like crazy. Little Indian kids on a bridge up in Canada, they can balance, they can climb like their fathers before them. They'll walk the girders of the Manhattan skyline. Shine your light on me, Miss Liberty, 'cause as soon as this ferry boat docks, I'm headed to the church to play bingo. Fleece me with a gambler's box. I can keep my cool at poker, but I'm a fool when love's at stake. 'Cause I can't conceal emotion while I'm feeling's always on my face. There's a gypsy down on Bleecker Street. I went in to see her as a kind of joke. She lit a candle for my love luck, and $18 went up in smoke. Sharon, I left my man at a North Dakota junction, and I came out to the Big Apple here to face the dreams malfunction. Love's a repetitious danger. You think I'd be accustomed to